At some point, you just stopped explaining yourself. Not because you had all the answers, but because you got tired. Tired of repeating. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of feeling like no explanation was ever enough. And now, you say less. You explain less. You let people assume whatever they want. But here's the quiet question that stays in the background. Did you become more confident, or did you just give up being understood? Problem. Deep dive. You notice it in small moments. Someone misinterprets your intention and you let it go. Someone assumes something about you and you don't correct them. A conversation goes slightly wrong, and instead of clarifying, you just withdraw. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just quietly. It feels like peace on the surface. But underneath, something shifts. You start feeling unseen. Not because people ignore you, but because you stop showing yourself clearly. And over time, your identity becomes a bit blurry. People know parts of you, but not the real context, not the reasoning, not the deeper layers. And strangely, you begin to feel disconnected, even in conversations. This creates a subtle loop. You don't explain. People misunderstand. You feel it's pointless. You explain even less. And eventually, you start believing something dangerous. People won't understand me anyway. But that belief didn't appear randomly. It was learned. And your brain had a reason for it. This is not apathy. This is not arrogance. And it's not even true confidence. This is adaptation. At some point in your life, explaining yourself didn't feel safe or worth it. Maybe people dismissed you. Maybe they interrupted. Maybe they twisted your words. Maybe they didn't listen long enough to understand. Your brain noticed this pattern, and it made a decision. Explaining effort, vulnerability, plus low reward. So it adjusted. It reduced the behavior. Not because you don't have depth, but because expressing that depth started to feel inefficient. This is what psychology calls a behavioral cost-reward adaptation. You didn't become someone who doesn't explain. You became someone who learned. Explaining doesn't pay off. But here's where it gets more complex. Because the brain doesn't just remove behaviors, it replaces them. Psychological mechanism. Think of your brain like a prediction machine. It constantly asks one question. What will likely happen if I do this? When you used to explain yourself, your brain tracked outcomes. Did people listen? Did they understand? Did it lead to connection? If the answer was repeatedly no, your brain updated its internal model. This is based on predictive processing. The brain doesn't react to reality directly. It reacts to what it expects reality to be. So now, before you even speak, your brain predicts they won't get it. And that prediction reduces your motivation to explain. There's also something called learned inefficacy. It's similar to learned helplessness, but more subtle. It's not that you believe nothing works. You just believe this specific effort isn't worth it anymore. Now add an 4. Explaining yourself requires cognitive effort, finding the right words, emotional exposure, being understood or rejected, social risk, judgment or dismissal. Your brain tries to minimize unnecessary energy loss. So it chooses silence. It feels efficient. It feels controlled. But there's a hidden cost. Because every time you don't explain, you reinforce the prediction that explaining is useless. This becomes a loop, a self-confirming system. You don't explain pi no one understands pi. You feel justified. You withdraw further, and slowly, Your external world starts matching your internal belief. But this pattern can be adjusted, not by forcing yourself to explain everything again, but by changing how your brain evaluates the process. Practical framework. 1. Selective explanation, not constant explanation. What to do. Choose when to explain, not whether to explain. Why it works. This breaks the brain's all or nothing pattern. Instead of explaining is useless, your brain learns explaining is useful in the right context. Example, you don't explain yourself in every casual interaction. But when something truly matters, you take the time to clarify your intention. This retrains your brain's cost-reward system. 2. Short, clear expression, reduce cognitive load. What to do. Say less, but say it clearly. Why it works. Long explanations increase cognitive fatigue. Your brain avoids them. Short explanations feel safer and easier to repeat, which increases behavioral consistency. Example, instead of over-explaining your decision, you say, I chose this because it feels right for me right now. Clear, contained, no overexposure. 3. Detach outcome from expression. What to do. Explain without expecting perfect understanding. Why it works. Your brain avoids actions tied to uncertain rewards. By removing the expectation, you reduce emotional risk. This lowers resistance. Example, you explain your perspective in a conversation, but you don't wait for validation. You allow misunderstanding without letting it define your effort. 4. Track. Safe interactions. What to do. Notice where you are understood. Why it works. Your brain has a negativity bias. It remembers failed explanations more than successful ones. By consciously tracking positive experiences, you update your brain's predictive model. Example, a friend listens carefully. Someone responds thoughtfully. A conversation flows. You mentally register in. This tells your brain, not all environments are the same. 5. Reconnect. Expression to identity. What to do. See explanation as self-expression, not persuasion. Why it works. When explaining becomes about convincing others, it feels exhausting. When it becomes about expressing yourself, it becomes internally rewarding. This activates intrinsic motivation. Example, you share your reasoning not to be agreed with, but to be accurate to yourself. This rebuilds the connection between identity and communication. You can think of this entire pattern like a filter. At first, your mind was open. You explained freely. You expressed without hesitation. Then, experiences added layers to the filter. Don't waste energy. They won't understand. It's not worth it. Now, everything passes through that filter, and most things don't make it out. The goal isn't to remove the filter completely, it's to adjust it, to make it more precise. So instead of blocking everything, it allows the right things through. Because your voice isn't a problem. Your brain just learned to protect it a little too much. You didn't stop explaining because you had nothing to say. You stopped because it stopped feeling meaningful. But meaning isn't something the world gives you. It's something you slowly rebuild. Through small, intentional expression. Not everywhere, not all the time. Just in the moments that matter. And maybe being understood isn't always the goal. Sometimes, the real shift is simpler than that. Learning to speak even when understanding isn't guaranteed. Because your voice was never meant to disappear. It just learned to hide.